Welcome to the 2016-2017 CWA Wrestling Rules presentation. My name is Scott Tarbox, and I'm the rules interpreter for the CWA. Again, this year we have very few actual rule changes, but we do have editorial changes and points of emphasis that we will review. After the presentation, your area director or presenter will answer any questions. The first rule change is with regard to Rule 5-11-2i. When a defensive wrestler commits a technical violation, applies an illegal hold or maneuver, commits an unnecessary roughness or unsportsmanlike act during an imminent or near-fall situation, the offensive wrestler shall be awarded a penalty point in addition to the near-fall points. While this seems the same as the prior rule, under the prior rule, the penalty point would only be awarded if the referee had to stop the match to prevent or stop the violation. If the violation could be corrected, for example, pushing the hands out of the offensive wrestler's face and allowing the wrestling to continue, in that event, no additional points would be awarded. With this rule change to 5-11-2i, when the defensive man commits a technical violation or applies a legal move or hold or commits unnecessary roughness, the infraction is treated similar to when a defensive wrestler is on his back and starts to bleed. In that situation, if there is an imminent near fall, the referee would stop the match, award a 2-point near fall. If a 2-point near fall had been earned, the referee would stop the match and award 3 points. And if a 3-point near fall had been earned, the referee would stop the match and award 4 points. Now, with this rule change, if a technical violation or other improper act occurs, the referee can correct the situation, allow the wrestling to continue if possible, and at the next clock stoppage, the referee would award the points similar to a bleeding near-fall situation, and in that situation, award the additional penalty point. Therefore, as an example, if there is a situation in which a 2-point near-fall had been earned and the defensive wrestler commits a technical violation, at the next clock stoppage, the referee would award a 3-point near fall, plus award the 1-point technical violation penalty point. This allows the wrestling to continue, but the defensive wrestler to be penalized for the improper act. If the defensive wrestler gets out of the near fall situation, the referee may want to stop the clock to give the points, instead of waiting for the next regular clock stoppage. This will help prevent confusion with your table and or with the coaches, but the clock must be stopped to award the additional penalty points and near fall. The next rule change is with regard to Rule 7-2-2g and h. G says it is a potentially dangerous move or hold when a wrestler stands with one or both arms trapped. While this has always been a potentially dangerous move or situation in the past, the Rules Committee has decided that it is important enough or dangerous enough that it needed to have its own rule in the book versus under the catch-all. With regard to Rule 7-2-2g, which again reads that it is a potentially dangerous hold or maneuver when a wrestler stands with one or both arms trapped. Coaches and officials and competitors all need to be aware of the potential for injury in this situation, because the defensive wrestler cannot use his arm or arms to protect himself when he is returned to the mat. Therefore, the referee should be verbally cautioning the wrestlers of the potentially dangerous situation without actually stopping the action unless the referee believes it's necessary to stop the action to prevent injury. As an example, many of us do stop the match when the top man has an armbar in and the bottom man stands. Taking this potentially dangerous situation one step further, the Wrestling Rules Committee has directed us to immediately stop the match when the defensive man stands and the offensive man has one or both arms blocked, and the offensive man lifts the defensive man off the mat. Because of the potential for injury, we immediately need to stop the match and call a potentially dangerous situation. Remember, however, that whenever the offensive man lifts the defensive man off the mat, the offensive man is responsible for the defensive man's safe return. Thus, regardless of whether it's called potentially dangerous, you could have a situation where a forceful trip or lifting and returning the man to the mat is called a slam or unnecessary roughness. In summary, trapping the arm or arms is not illegal by application, but it is a potentially dangerous situation and can turn into an unnecessary roughness or slam call. The best thing we can do as officials is to verbally caution the wrestlers and try to prevent those situations if possible. Be aware that some states within the National Federation are immediately going to call potentially dangerous as soon as the wrestlers stand if one or both arms are blocked. This is not the interpretation for Colorado, however. In Colorado, we will verbally caution the wrestlers when they stand, but not stop the match unless the defensive man is lifted off the mat. In Colorado specifically, a standing armbar will be called potentially dangerous and stopped immediately, regardless of whether the defensive man is lifted off the mat. In addition, with little h, the Rules Committee added the language that any hold or maneuver which may cause injury when used legally is a potentially dangerous hold or maneuver. Of course, that is not really a rule change, but it's a recognition in the book of those situations. That is it for the wrestling rule changes for this year. Now we're on to the wrestling editorial changes. The first editorial change is with regard to Rule 2-1-5, which reads, "The mat area includes the wrestling mat and a space of at least 10 feet surrounding the mat where facilities permit, as well as the team benches and scores table." This is not a rule change because the term "where facilities permit" has been in this rule. However, the Rules Committee now has moved this clause "where facilities permit" to be closer to the statement that there needs to be at least 10 feet surrounding the mat. This is in recognition of the fact that some smaller gymnasiums cannot provide for 10 feet surrounding the mat. Rule 5-16 is similarly being changed because it addresses the same definition of the mat. In this case, the mat area includes the wrestling mat and a space of at least 10 feet surrounding the mat where facilities permit. Please note that despite these changes to Rule 5-16 and 2-1-5, the rule book for this year does not have these changes. It still reads as it did in the past years. Again, this is not a rule change, it's just a clarification or editorial change for this year, so it should not be a problem. The next editorial change is with regard to Rule 4-1-3 and involves the shoelaces. This rule now reads that if the shoes have laces, the laces shall either be taped to the shoe or secured by a locking device on the wrestling shoe in an acceptable fashion. Although this is not a rule change per se and is an editorial change according to the National Federation, this does change the interpretation for Colorado. As you know, in the past, Colorado provided that if the shoelaces were properly knotted, then they were deemed properly secured. With this editorial change, however, the previous Colorado interpretation will no longer be followed. and Colorado will follow the National Federation Rule 4-1-13. Therefore, when a wrestler presents at the table to check in, the wrestler must have his or her shoelaces taped to the shoe or secured by another locking device on the shoe. Again, no longer will we allow laces to be knotted and deemed acceptable. They must be taped to the shoe or secured by a locking device on the shoe. The next editorial change is with regard to Rule 4-1-4 relating to wrestlers' uniforms. Article 4 says, wrestlers shall wear wrestling ear guards designed by the manufacturer for the sport of wrestling that are rigid and padded. This editorial change was put in because apparently a new type of wrestling helmet has been developed and is being used in the New York area. Note that this wrestling helmet has not been approved by the National Federation, and in fact it has not even been presented to the National Federation for approval. Therefore, again, this editorial change just provides that the headgear, ear guards, must be designed for the sport of wrestling and are rigid and padded. There is a clarification to Rule 5-11-4b regarding technical falls. In the past, the only time a wrestler who had earned a technical fall could lose was if he or she committed flagrant misconduct. This has been clarified and changed to provide that after a wrestler has earned a technical fall, he cannot lose the match. The match is deemed ended and the flagrant misconduct call occurs after the match. In that situation, the offensive wrestler who had won the match and called for flagrant misconduct would be disqualified, stripped of all team points, as well as the deduction of 3 team points, and removed from the premises. The wrestling rulebook is incorrect and needs to be corrected. On page 23, Rule 5-11-4b, by deleting the phrase except by flagrant misconduct. Delete that phrase, except by flagrant misconduct. Now we are on to the National Federation points of emphasis. The first point of emphasis of the National Federation is with regard to communicable skin conditions. This has been a point of emphasis for a number of years and continues to be a problem around the country. So this slide, as you see, it says, it is imperative that all referees perform skin checks or verify that skin checks have been done by a designated on-site meet-appropriate healthcare professional or the wrestling official. If there is a suspicious condition, the wrestler or coach must present the proper clearance form at the weigh-in for any dual meet tournament in order for the wrestler to be allowed to compete. Reminder that before the dual meet begins, the referee shall perform skin checks or verify skin checks have been performed by a designated on-site meet-appropriate healthcare professional. Note that in Colorado, the appropriate healthcare professional must be a medical doctor, a doctor of osteopathy, a nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant. No other medical professional person is authorized to sign the skin check form or make the determination with regard to the skin check. It can only be performed by one of those 4 type medical professionals. Again, it must be a medical doctor, a doctor of osteopathy, a nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant. This next slide is simply a reminder that before a tournament begins each day, skin checks must be performed by the official or the designated on-site appropriate healthcare professional. I know that sometimes officials think that if the skin was okay yesterday, that it is okay again today. However, we cannot allow that type of nonchalant attitude. We must check skin on each day of a tournament. During the National Federation Rules Committee presentation, they spent a fair amount of time discussing situations around the country where skin conditions have caused a problem, and situations where wrestlers were prevented from wrestling in state tournaments or otherwise because of an outbreak of a skin condition. Coaches, parents, wrestlers, and officials need to do what they can to help identify and prevent these outbreaks from occurring so that these situations do not occur. We actually had an outbreak that prevented a couple of wrestlers from wrestling in our state tournament last February. In one case, the outbreak was in a location on the wrestler's back that the wrestler could not even see it, and therefore did not know he even had a problem. In this situation, we need coaches to be vigilant and inspect their wrestlers on a daily basis and identify those problems so that they can be addressed and treated immediately. Otherwise, it is very tragic when a kid gets to the state tournament and is prevented from wrestling for a situation he did not know he even had. The National Federation's statement is, when in doubt, send them out. The meaning, of course, is that as wrestling officials, we need to be vigilant on doing skin checks, and if there's any question, we need to prevent the wrestler from wrestling and send them to a medical professional. Similarly, coaches have the responsibility to check their kids, and if there's any question, send them to a medical professional in advance of the wrestling event and have the proper form filled out and brought to the weigh-ins of the next wrestling event. This next slide is simply a reminder that one way to prevent the spread of communicable skin conditions is to not allow wrestlers to use or share towels, razors, or soap. The next slide is simply a reminder that one key to preventing the spread of communicable skin conditions is to have the mat cleaned with a water and bleach combination or an appropriate commercial cleaner. The next point of emphasis is with regard to the concept of control and the fact that it is the very essence of wrestling. Control occurs when an individual wrestler gains control of his or her opponent in such a way that he or she has restraining power over them. There are 3 phases of control: gaining control, losing control, and changing control. And it is important that the official is able to recognize when each phase transitions to another phase. The next point of emphasis is with regard to the arm trap and the recognition of a potentially dangerous situation when the defensive wrestler stands and the offensive wrestler has the arm trapped. Specifically, in a rear standing position with the defensive wrestler's arm trapped while he or she is lifted off his feet, it should be considered a potentially dangerous situation. There is a risk that when the wrestler is returned to the mat and has no use of his arms to break the fall, a serious injury could occur. Returning the wrestler to the mat in a controlled fashion is one of the highest priorities for the controlling wrestler and the observing official. The next point of emphasis from the National Federation is with regard to wrestler conduct. Specifically, coaches and referees must be at the forefront in promoting good sportsmanship, which includes the eliminating profanity among the athletes. There was discussion at the National Federation Rules Committee that this is education-based athletics, and therefore coaches and officials need to work together on this situation of wrestler conduct. Each match is an opportunity to teach a life lesson in conjunction with wrestling, and coaches who model good and appropriate behavior will send a positive message to the student wrestlers and the spectators. The positive values learned will serve the student long after their interscholastic wrestling careers have concluded. This is something that, again, coaches and wrestling officials need to work together on to be good role models and to encourage good, positive conduct by the athletes. The National Federation Rules Committee is very concerned about the decline in participation in our sport of wrestling. They're recognizing that there are a number of contributing factors, including concussions, the uniforms, skin conditions, reduced or lack of home matches, and simply the recognition that young people have many other options to occupy their time and their energy. The Rules Committee will continue to investigate other factors that are creating barriers for our young people to enjoy the sport of wrestling, and will work from a rules perspective to make helpful changes. The committee encourages local coaches to work with their school administration to address these issues as best they can at all levels of wrestling in their community. Together, we can turn this decline into an increase and welcome more young people into the sport of wrestling. Our next section here is with regard to the Colorado rule procedures, reminders, changes, clarifications, etc. The first Colorado rule reminder is with regard to the use of prohibited electronic devices for videotaping. As a reminder, in Colorado, it is not permissible to use an electronic device while on the mat to videotape the match. Nor may an electronic device be used to review wrestling during a timeout or to contest or dispute an official's decision. Note that the Colorado interpretation does vary from the rulebook. Therefore, as wrestling officials, if you are at a tournament or a wrestling event in which out-of-state teams are participating, you need to make sure that the out-of-state coaches understand how Colorado's interpretation of this rule varies from the rule book. Again, this is not a change from the prior year. It is a reminder of Colorado's interpretation of the videotaping rule. Also note that it is not a problem for videotaping to occur off the mat by a mat mate or other teammate, for example. It just cannot occur on the mat or be used to review wrestling during a timeout or to contest or dispute an official's decision. Our next slide here is with regard to the approved skin condition form for Colorado. Note that in Colorado we have a specific state-approved form approved by CHASA. You can tell if it's a properly approved form because it has CHASA's banner in the upper left-hand corner and looks like the one on screen. No other form is acceptable. To be a properly prepared form, the form must be dated within 7 days of the event, and the lesion specifically must be noted on the image of the body on the form. And, of course, it must be signed by a medical doctor, a doctor of osteopathy, a nurse practitioner, or a physician's assistant. No other person can sign the note. The wrestling official will look to confirm that these requirements are met when they review the form. For coaches, this form can be found on the CHASA website as well as on the Colorado Wrestling Officials Association website at cwoa.us. Again, encourage coaches to perform their own skin checks, and if they see any potential or possible suspicious skin condition, they need to send their wrestler to a doctor or one of these 4 medical professionals and have a skin form filled out and signed. Also, encourage coaches then to review the form so that they are not surprised at the weigh-in when a form is not properly prepared. The next slide is with regard to coach-official interaction. By rule, coaches absolutely have the right to request a conference with the official. That conference needs to occur in front of the scores table, not in the corner or any other place on the mat. We have heard reports that some officials will not permit a coach to have this conference, but again, by rule, the coach is absolutely entitled to that conference. During that conference, if a coach questions the judgment of the official, it is coach misconduct, and the coach is either warned or penalized according to the rule. If a coach points out a misapplication of a rule and the official agrees, then there is no warning or penalty. If, however, no change is made by the official or no misapplication is determined, it is again coach misconduct, and the coach shall be warned or penalized according to the rule. If, however, a coach simply seeks a clarification of the rule, there is no coach misconduct, provided the coach approaches the official calmly and respectfully, or the coach does not then argue or otherwise question the official's clarification or judgment. The coach promptly returns to his chair without further comment or remark, or the coach does not seek multiple or repeated clarifications which disrupt the match or are used to simply harass the official. In these foregoing situations, a coach has a right to seek the clarification without being warned or penalized for coach misconduct. It is important to recognize that coaches and officials need to be able to communicate, and if it is done properly, there is no penalty or warning. It is also important to recognize that when coaches and officials interact, they are serving as role models for the wrestlers, and therefore such interaction needs to be done calmly and respectfully. Beginning this season, we will use a weighmaster to conduct weigh-ins at tournaments. Specifically, instead of all officials assigned to the tournament appearing for and conducting weigh-ins, a weighmaster, who will be a CWA registered official, will supervise weigh-ins and conduct skin checks. Each host school will be responsible for providing 2 adult individuals per scale to conduct the actual weigh-ins, record weights, and perform hair and nail checks. The weighmaster will always perform the skin checks and deal with any issues that arise during the weigh-ins. For larger tournaments, there may be 2 weighmasters if it needed for efficiency. The weighmaster will be paid an additional $37.50 for performing the weighmaster duties. All other officials not serving as the weighmaster shall be dressed and ready to officiate at least 15 minutes prior to the published start time of the tournament. The weighmaster shall be responsible for contacting the host school to determine the number of scales used and for arranging for 2 adult individuals to be provided by the host school to perform the weigh-ins on each scale. And finally, the new tournament pay program instituted for the 2015-2016 season has been slightly modified to provide that the additional per match fee will only be paid starting 8 hours after the scheduled start of wrestling versus last year's rule of 8 hours after the start of weigh-ins. Therefore, as an example, if wrestling is scheduled to start at 9 a.m., the additional match fee would not start until 5 p.m., or 8 hours after the scheduled start of wrestling. And that concludes the wrestling rule changes, clarifications, and points of emphasis. As a note, the National Federation has a vast amount of educational resources on their website that can be used by officials as well as coaches. One resource is the electronic rulebook that can be downloaded from the National Federation website. The electronic book is highly searchable, provides highlighted areas of interest, allows you to make notes, can be used on your desktop. The cost is $5.99 per casebook and per rulebook. The National Federation Central Hub contains other resources: sports information, rule information, rules library, video content on officiating, competition situations and interpretations. In addition, there's other educational courses and videos for new officials, including the basics of becoming and staying an official, a science of officiating as an art, etc., etc. The Cost is $20 for non-members, but all registered officials are members of the National Federation, and so those would be free for your use. That concludes the 2016-2017 rules presentation. If you should have any questions or need clarification, my telephone number and email address are in the directory and on the CWOA.us website. Thank you, and have a great season.